Today's guest is Savin Joseph. He's the Senior Director of Business Development at ICF. Savin is also an ACT-IAC Fellow. He participates with AFCEA and HiMMS. And Savin, I always enjoy interacting with you when we're at networking events. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So for those who haven't met you, had a chance to talk with you, talk a bit about your background. Where are you from, who you are, and what you do?
So a bit about my background. I'm from Virginia, Northern Virginia, born and raised. Spent the majority of that time in Woodbridge, Virginia. Went to school in North Carolina. Went to North Carolina Central University. And during that time, college, you learn a lot about yourself. And I think one of the things, being from the DMV area, you realize, right, when you leave, is that you're not as nice as you think you are, right? And in North Carolina, definitely showed that to me, and I've brought that back. So that whole idea of just hospitality and being hospitable, being nice, being courteous, speaking and making people feel welcome, right, is something that's really stayed with me. And I think, especially with me being in my role as a business developer, I see that as a benefit. Like where when I was younger, I was annoyed by the folks who randomly said hi, and now I'm the guy in my neighborhood who's like, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on?"
Gotta build relationships, right?
Yeah. So that's a bit about me. I think as far as like education wise, I was, I think, for the most part, studied mass communications. That's what I got my degree in, but started in music. I was a music major for about one semester, and I was concentrated on music industry, right? And that's one of the things early on, where now when I look back on it, I'm like, man, I was destined to be in some type of business role, right? As a businessman, right? So like, because back then I was interested in the music, but also the business behind the music. All right, what this contract look like? Who are you signed to? And are you in a JV with this other large label that's doing the distribution deal? Like, oh, right. And all those things were intriguing to me back then, right? But it wasn't until I got older, and I've gravitated just to business like activity. So actually, when I graduated in the fall of 2009, and it was during the recession, so there were no jobs, and I had the opportunity to create my own job, which was great. So I was a freelance photographer for some time. I've been shooting since 2006 when I was in school. And got out and started doing weddings, doing events, had some published photos and things like that. Even had a job to go work for the Roanoke Post, right? Job offer to work there, which is pretty cool. A lot of people don't know that, but that's kind of the thing. But that was a weird time because newspapers were newspapers, and the internet was the internet, and you weren't sure what was going to happen. So didn't think that was a smart move. So I pivoted to IT. I did a lot of things. I did a little bit of education, a little bit of social work, right? And because mass comm is just so general, you can kind of get into anything, right? But I landed on IT just because of, you wouldn't think because of musical background, but when you're dealing with like music production and things like that too, technology ends up being a factor, right? So ended up gravitating to technology. And started actually working for AppleCare.
Wow.
So that was my first IT job. I was a call advisor for AppleCare. I was working on the iPhones, the iPads, and I hated every minute of it. But it was great though, because during that time I had jumped around so much, and I had made the decision to stick with IT, right? And once I made that decision, made the job easier, because then I had a focus. All right, if I'm staying here, how far do I want to go, and how can this job take me to where I want to go? So it kind of started as, all right, I'm working on the phones now, but those folks over there are working on the computers. If I can get to the computers, then there's more opportunity there. So Like as soon as I made a decision, within like 3 months, I was promoted to doing like tier 1 desktop support for desktops, laptops, and all that stuff, and ended up being a senior advisor where, you know, after, if I couldn't solve the problem, I'm talking to the engineers to fix it, right? Which is pretty cool. And during that time, to show you how dedicated I was to IT at the time, I actually started shadowing at Cisco on my days off.
Oh, wow.
So I had a couple of friends who worked for Cisco and a couple of other IT companies, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm trying to learn about IT. I don't know anything. Like, where should I start? And naturally, they're like, hey, start with what we're doing. Try this out. Here are some routers. If you can configure these routers, you might have a chance, right? And I was able to do it, which was great, and it gave me a really good baseline understanding of IT, right? Of, you know, where everything falls in the stack, right? And kind of, you know, we were talking earlier, and what I alluded to earlier. So the OSI stack came up in conversation, right? And it's funny because like now I don't work in that technical capacity as much as anymore. So, you know, he started talking about like layers 5 through 7. I was like, I'm a little rusty, but I know it's not the physical parts. What are you talking about here? He's like, oh yeah, just application. All right, I got you. Okay, I'm following now, right? We're talking about data, but it was interesting. But I think during that time and how I transitioned into the GovCon space, I was shadowing at Cisco, so I was naturally looking at Cisco positions. And I am not a very good test taker. I think I actually am probably better now than I was when I was younger, but was not a very good test taker. And I was studying for the CCNA. And if you're familiar with that, with that certification, it's a pretty hard test to take. And I had already failed it maybe like 3 times. So, and I didn't take a course, mind you. I was shadowing engineers at Cisco, and I was, you know, doing everything. And I can configure the routers, I could put it all together, I could do my subnetting. I was great. And I just couldn't pass that test, right? And I got to a point where I said, all right, I'm only taking this test one more time. Took the test and missed it by 10 points.
Oh,
right. And, you know, and I was, you know, and it was at that point where I was like, you know what? I'm moving back home. There's a Cisco headquarters in Herndon, right? And I'm going to move back up here, and I'm just going to look for these job positions here. And I moved back up here, and all those positions moved back down to the research triangle where I was. So then I had to make another decision, right? So, you know, I started applying, and actually, for my first federal consulting gig, I went to open house at the Ambit Group. Okay. Yeah. And they were hiring DBAs, database administrators, and I randomly got it from a friend who sent it to me, and I went in and walked in and interviewed. I did the first interview. I did maybe about 5 interviews that day, and they said, you know what? You weren't what we're looking for, but we have a position for you. We'll contact you in like 6 weeks. So I waited and all that stuff. Ended up getting the job, which was great. And that kind of started off my career path in the federal consulting space. So, which is cool.
That's unique, right? That you would interview for one job, and not every company will do that, right? And consider an applicant and go, you know, they didn't fit here, so let's see if they fit there. Some places will just say, oh, good luck, right?
Exactly. Which was pretty cool, right? It was eye-opening to me because you know, it was one of those things, because you know, like you apply for a job where, you know, you have an interview, you're like, oh man, this is the one. Like I can't confirm it yet, but this is the one, right? And it was like that, right? So I was still, you know, I was still studying, I was still doing my reading. That whole 6 weeks, I was still applying, still interviewing, and so on and so forth. And, you know, I was like, you know, I'm still gonna do these things, but if this job offer comes in, I'm probably gonna take it, right? So, which was good. But yeah, no, it was look, it's surreal now. I mean, it's almost 10 years ago at this point. Now I'm like, man, wow, okay. So it's
that's pretty amazing. And then how did you end up at ICF?
So ICF. So I had I have a few people that I know that worked at ICF before I was there. And first, David Yang had reached out to me first and was like, "Hey, we're hiring folks. If you know anyone, or if you're interested, let me know." And he was pleasantly persistent, which was as all good BDers are, right? And and it felt like I got the full court press too, because I had other people who I'd worked with before, who I'd volunteered with before, and they had all reached out and said, "Hey, like." It was like kind of like soft recruiting, right? Like asking, like, oh, kind of the similar questions, like, where do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing? Or like, what are things that you're interested in, right? And like, trying, and they slowly just pulled me in, which is great. But now, I've been here 2 months, enjoying every minute of it, just learning and collaborating with some very, very intelligent folks. So excited.
Yeah. So as you've gone through that journey, a variety of things you've gone in your career so far. What's something you've seen that maybe we should reconsider? Maybe it's a change we should implement, or something that, was frustrating and it would be better if we did things differently. What's that look like for you?
I think the thing that I would change, right, with all the themes of like equity and inclusion, right, business development is not anything that I knew about growing up, right? And it's funny now, because now that I'm older and I look back and I see what other people are doing, there are people who I've grown up with who are doing these types of things, right? And I just remember, I remember growing up where I had one of the boosters, one of the football boosters, the parents were talking about, like, if they could do it again, they're like, yeah, I'm a federal employee, but if I could do it again, I would be a consultant. So all they do is just talk all day, right? and it's funny because it kind of stuck with me, right? And I was like, well, what is the difference, right? But to your point, as far as the question is concerned, I mean, I think providing that level of access to folks who may not necessarily know about it, right? Because there are these opportunities out here. Because I think I got into business development, but when I got into it, I like to think that I got into it late compared to other people who jumped into it like right out of college as like a business development analyst and just kind of rode that wave. Where I appreciate my journey because I started in delivery and transitioned over into business development. But kind of to our earlier conversation where I know a number of folks who've done business development just in my personal circle that have nothing to do with this industry. And their journey is 10 times different than my journey, and part of it is just due to awareness, right, and understanding, and even having like a sense of what it looks like, what a community is, and really how to cultivate that community too as well.
That's really interesting, because you're right. There is no like, here's the degree path for, it's because you want to work in business development, right? There's no real good, clear connection between, if I'm going to go to college, or maybe I don't go to college, I want to get into BD. What skills, what experience should I have that will do me well, or what attitude should I have that'll do me well in that career?
Yeah, I mean, I think attitude is definitely the biggest thing I would say, but I think the backgrounds are so diverse for folks, right? I've bumped into lawyers who are doing business development, right? And I was like, wow, that's interesting, right? Because I've thought about law school, but do I really want to go to law school and still do the same thing, right? So it's different things like that, which is cool. But it's just like anything else. You have to look for it, and if you find it, right? But that to answer your question, that would be one thing I would change.
Yeah. So what's next for you, Savin? I know you've only been at ICF for 2 months, so I'm not saying you're gonna make a job change, but what's the future look like for you as you're trying to figure out how to get integrated into their culture?
I think the next steps for me is really just mastering the subject matter, right? I think that's the big thing. Really mastering it. I try to, with anything I do, I really just try to take ownership, right? And say, all right, if this was me, if I own this, if the buck stops with me, how would I want this to be done, right? And I think for me, it's just really just mastering the subject matter and really getting an understanding of what we do as a company, the interesting things, because we do a lot of very interesting things. And I was getting ready to switch into sales mode, right?
That's okay. You can sales pitch a little, because ICF's a really interesting company that not a lot of people know about.
Exactly, right. So a lot of different, a lot of interesting stuff that we do, and a lot of interesting history too, just around the company in general. So like, I think for me, really just taking time, sitting back, understanding the subject matter, and really just making the most of it, right? Because I think the thing that, the thing that I grab that pulls me to this industry is the fact that, like, we have the opportunity to really impact everyone that we touch every day, right? And it's, in the first contract I worked on was at the FCC, and I just remember, we were talking about the spectrum auctions, right? And I'm looking at cell phones, I'm looking at radios, I'm looking at like the buzzers at Applebee's, like, hey, I helped with that, right? So I think, like, being able to have that level of impact, and now that I'm more mature and in working in the capacity I'm working in today, it's really, that competition behind it too, right? Like, I'm really helping to drive competition to make sure that my tax dollars are being spent appropriately, right? And I think that's really I look at that as a very, very noble thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, there's a certain level of fulfillment to that, right? Like I said, you really impact everyone that you bump into, right? So that's kind of my thing there.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been really interesting getting to hear your varied history and how you got where you are. And I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully soon.
Hey, no, I appreciate it. Same to you, man.